Good day, everyone, and welcome back to our continuation of our week 2 lesson, the principles of good writing. So, last session, we discussed the first four principles, so let's do a quick review. For the principle of be brief, this is about creating writing that's clear and concise. Don't overextend, don't stretch out any of your sentences, only say what's important. Next principle is be precise. You use the word that your meaning requires. Don't use words that are just close or, even worse, sounds like the word. Third is be imaginative. Use analogies, similes, and other figures of speech to give life to your writing. Fourth is be active. As much as possible, use the active voice when you write your sentences to make your sentences have more life and give it action. In today's lesson, we will now tackle the last three of the principles of good writing. The first of the last three is be direct. Be direct is a very different principle from be brief. Well, be brief tells us to only say what's important, to not be too verbose with our sentences. Be direct tells us to go straight to the point when it comes to the idea of our sentence. We need to be able to give or present our sentences appropriately and directly to the proper audience. The next principle is be consistent. With be consistent, we have to acknowledge and follow parallelism. In parallelism, this states that verb tenses should not change mid-sentence. And at the same time, with be consistent, you have to follow the structure of the entire paragraph. If your list begins with a verb modified with an adverb, then the rest of your list should begin with a verb modified with an adverb. So if ever you want to say, here comes a pretty tree, a pretty flower, and then damp grass. It's not consistent. It should be pretty tree, pretty flower, pretty grass. Or even like, she eats and then woke up and will go to school. There is an inconsistency of the verb tenses. So be consistent tells us that we should follow the parallelism. So here are a few faulty phrases under the be consistent. First faulty phrase is one cannot think well, have love, and fall asleep if dinner was bad. So this is considered a faulty phrase because if you look at the structure of the verbs, think well, have love, fall asleep, if dinner was bad, there's no consistency. There's no consistent structure in the sentences. Instead, the solution is one cannot think well, love well, and sleep well if one has not dined well. So as you can see, compared to the initial sentence, the quote-unquote solution sentence is more structured and feels more connected. Let's try the second one. Jane likes to hunt and fishing. So as we can see here, there is no parallelism between the verbs to hunt and fishing. So there are two ways to solve this sentence. We can either change it to Jane likes to hunt and to fish, or Jane likes hunting and fishing. For the third one, Peter planned to visit the fair, ate popcorn, and will try the roller coaster. I will give this one to you guys. If you have an answer, if you think you have an answer, I want you guys to message me in Teams and include in the message, of course, your section, what subject this is for, and your revised sentence. Do add into the message the context that this is for the be consistent faulty phrase answer. So of course, first five students who would be able, or the first five students who will be able to give me an answer before the deadline of 1:15 p.m. will get bonus points. The last principle is be aware. We have to catch ourselves falling to stereotyping, generalizing, plagiarizing, oversimplifying, jumping to conclusions, applying faulty logic or circular arguments, and overusing pronouns and articles in our writings. We have to be conscious and sensitive of what we write. We should consider not only the topic, but also the people reading it. We also have to consider the people being represented in our writings. When it comes to writing, social empathy and awareness is needed. A good writer shows sensitivity in how they present their information and are also conscious of the people reading their works. So to differentiate each of the things that we have listed below in the definition, stereotyping is the enforcement of usually wrong and hurtful set ideas of what someone or something is like. Generalizing is concluding that something is right in all cases based on something that has happened in some cases. So for example, in generalizing, you can say that uh, every time I go to McDonald's, there is no ice cream. That means that McDonald's does not have a supply of ice cream. So it's a hasty generalization that we will be reviewing a little bit of your logic lessons here. Plagiarism is using someone's idea and claiming it as your own. There's also a thing such as self-plagiarism, wherein you resubmit your old outputs into a new activity, or you resubmit an output from a different subject into this other subject. Next is oversimplifying. You're explaining something in a very simple way that it no longer becomes true. So for example, if one were to explain multimedia arts, one can oversimplify it by saying, computer, Photoshop raman na. While that's a very simple way of trying to phrase MMA, that way of looking at it is no longer true. It's oversimplifying it. Next is jumping to conclusion. This is judging without having all of the facts and without fact checking existing information. So it's really important for you as the writer to double check any information that you have on hand and to also double check if your sources are accurate. Next is overusing pronouns or articles. Overusing pronouns and articles lack proper identifier on the subject that's being referred to and can result in a stiff writing voice. This is very common, especially if you're referring to two people of the same gender. There is a tendency for people to use, let's say, he or she repeatedly without indicating which he they are referring to. So, for example, two friends, Ben and George, are talking. If you want to tell your friend that Ben and George were talking and Ben and George were also doing something while they were talking, with the overuse of pronouns, your sentences might come off like he was talking while he was waving his hands, and while he was talking, he was also agreeing by nodding along. When he mentioned this part, he reacted in a certain way. So the overuse of the word he there ends up losing or is not the proper way to identify each of the subject. Who is Ben and who is George in that context? Which he are they referring to? So that is the issue of overusing pronouns and articles. And with that, those are all of the 7 principles of good writing. I hope that you will apply these principles not only in our subject, but also in your other day-to-day write-ups. So if you have any questions or concerns about the topic on hand, feel free to message me in Teams and I will gladly clarify any questions.